They see the role as decisive, and they certainly see Chancellor Merkel's leadership here as vital. That's a lot of pressure, though, on the German leaders to get this crisis right. And I think there is some concern in Washington that perhaps Germany isn't taking quick enough steps, overwhelming steps to resolve it, that the crisis is lingering and creating more uncertainty the longer it's not resolved. But yes, all eyes are on Germany. Yes, transatlantically we both have very significant portions of debt to our GDP. There are differences in approach. I think, again, Europe is looking at debt breaks or constitutional amendments to ensure a balanced budget. In the fiscal compact, they are ensuring that deficit and debt figures remain within certain bands. You don't see that conversation happening in Washington, although some do believe that we need a constitutional amendment to ensure a balanced budget in the future. So there is a difference of an opinion. I think there's a difference of opinion, quite frankly, on the remedies to the crisis, where, again, a German approach is much more focused on austerity and restructuring and structural reforms. I think in the U.S. it's more concerned about economic growth and stimulating that growth, and that stimulus may require tax breaks and more government spending. Well, I think transatlantically there's been a great deal of work done on banking regulation and reform, the Frank-Dodd Act in the U.S. and Europe certainly tightening up reform, creating new authorities, new institutions. You certainly see in Europe a very strong focus on capping compensation and making sure that bankers aren't enjoying risk-taking behavior. The Europeans go a little farther in looking at a financial transaction tax to make sure that taxpayer bailouts are not going to be the norm in the future, that the banks will help provide that cushion. You're not seeing any conversation in Washington about either a financial transaction tax, although American regulators are obviously concerned about compensation and making sure the banks are and bankers and risk takers don't receive crazy amounts of compensation. I think there's a bit more of a fervor in Europe on that end than in the U.S. It will be presented in a fairly negative view. You certainly get the sense from the Obama administration that they want Europe to resolve this crisis as quickly as possible using European means, and they don't want anything to provide any type of negative shock to the American economy. Republican primary debate, Europe has become part of the dialogue in that debate. On the one hand, those who want to focus on debt reduction in the U.S. point to Greece and say the United States may look like Greece one day if we don't reduce that debt. Others are arguing about the role of government and some point to so-called European socialism as a way to describe a large government role in society. I know this is it's very harsh to hear this in Europe. It's unfortunately been part of our political conversation, but I think it has less to do with Europe than about how the United States is going to see the role of government in the future. Well, there's not a security concern per se. I think the concern is that as European defense spending continues to decrease, that we're really hollowing out the ability of NATO to act both out of area, if that's required, or its primary responsibility, which is collective defense. Now, this wasn't created by the economic crisis. European defense spending has gone down over the last decade, but it's certainly been accelerated by the crisis. And last year, Secretary Gates, in his farewell speech to Europe, basically warned the American taxpayer isn't going to pay the bill for NATO fully. It needs Europe to put forward more robust defense spending. So that's the concern, is making sure that we have a vibrant alliance in the future. Well, I think there's going to be a lot of signaling. As I said, Secretary Gates sent the first big signal to Europe that it needs to step forward and increase its defense spending. The second message was the removal of a second combat brigade from Europe, needing to rebalance our global defense posture. And you're absolutely right, the pivot to Asia, which is probably not the best word to use, again, it's a rebalancing. We have to be sure that as America obviously focuses on the Asia-Pacific theater, which is important, that doesn't necessarily signal to the world that that's our only focus and that we're not paying attention to other important developments, whether they're in the Middle East, South Asia, Europe. As a global power, we have responsibilities around the world, and we're not only going to focus on one region. Well, I think it's obviously proving to be an extraordinary domestic challenge, and European leaders are very absorbed by this challenge, leaving less time and space for a security or transatlantic security dialogue. The Alliance has a very important summit this May in Chicago, where it's going to talk about the transition strategy for Afghanistan, and that conversation's been made more complicated by the French decision and perhaps again with the Americans deciding to transition from combat to training. We also have a difficult conversation on defense capabilities, and this gets back to European cuts in their defense spending. NATO would like to start what they're calling a smart defense program, which means that as countries are reducing their defense spending, the United States will be doing that as well, that we're doing it smartly and we're working together, making sure that we have sufficient capabilities. And then finally, a conversation on the missile defense architecture in Europe, the European phased adaptive approach, and continuing concerns from Russia that this program will not be a joint effort, but and Moscow does not believe this is the right way to go. So that will provoke a lively conversation in Chicago, I'm sure. I think that we're at a really important moment in the relationship where we're going to have to make some fundamental decisions about the importance of the transatlantic relationship, whether political leaders are going to invest time, enthusiasm, creativity in deepening and strengthening the relationship. Unfortunately, what I've seen over the last 18 months or so, again very much due to the debt crisis, is that political leaders are turning inward, they're focusing on their domestic problems, and that everyone's sort of going it alone, whether that's talking to China or dealing with security challenges. We're not turning transatlantically to Europe and the United States together to solve a problem. We're sort of pivoting away from each other. So this is an important moment. I think the upcoming NATO summit will be an important opportunity to strengthen the transatlantic relationship. I'd like to see the U.S.-European Union relationship become much more strategic, less bureaucratic, and we obviously have a G8 summit that will hopefully bring the transatlantic community together with our Japanese colleagues and looking at big global issues like Iran, like the Deauville Partnership, North Africa, Middle East Partnership. We have a lot of big issues on our plate, and we have a lot of work to do. So I hope we focus transatlantically on that work, and hopefully we'll see some positive outcomes.